Do you think you could just kind of give us a little overview about who you are? How'd you get started in all this? Like, you're an emergency medicine physician, but what's your kind of background and how'd you get into all of this?
Well, that's right. Professionally, by training, I'm an emergency physician. In undergraduate, I studied science. I had zero interest in business whatsoever. I've always been a little bit interested in personal finance, but
Okay.
not dramatically. Certainly not as an undergraduate. Certainly not in medical school. It wasn't until I got to residency, earned my first few paychecks, that I really started being interested in making money and what you do with money once you make it.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing how your first paycheck does that. And it turned out my first few interactions with financial professionals didn't go so well.
Mm-hmm.
I got ripped off by a financial planner. I got ripped off by an insurance agent who happened to be one of my best friends.
Mm-hmm.
I got ripped off by a lender. I got ripped off by a realtor. I got ripped off by a recruiter. And at a certain point, I just said, if I don't do something about this, this is just going to continue throughout my career and my life.
Sure.
And so I decided, well, I'm going to self-educate a little bit. My house was next to a used bookstore in Residency. And so I'd walk over there and I'd look through the financial racks. They'd have a few racks of books. And I'd buy books at $2 or $3 a piece and I'd read them. And after 20 books or so, I realized this stuff isn't that complicated. I read a lot of bad books, but I also read a few good books and realized, hey, there's not that much to this. And then I started looking around and realizing there's no other doctors that know this stuff.
Yep.
And so I just started being the resources for other doctors around me, and I was helping other people online. And then finally in 2011, I decided, well, instead of just typing the same thing over and over again into internet forums,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start my own website. And then I can just paste a link in and they can go read what I wrote. I only have to write it once. And that is how the White Coat Investor was born. Now, I kind of had an entrepreneurial idea with it from the very beginning. So it was a for-profit website from the very beginning. I threw some ads up there, in the first week. But it didn't make much money for a couple of years. Now it's been quite a financial success as well, which I'm obviously happy about.
Yeah.
But mostly the goal of it is to just help those who are willing to go into fields like medicine get a fair shake on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. So they can have this knowledge. It took me years of self-study to pick up of how the financial world really works and get it right at the beginning of their career when it's most useful. Mm-hmm. So that's the whole point of it. Then in 2014, I wrote a book called The White Coat Investor, A Doctor's Guide to Personal Finance and Investing. Basically, I'd been encouraged by blog readers to write a book. And I said, I'll get to it. I should have done that 2 years earlier because it just sold like crazy. It still sells like crazy. It's by far and away, it's the most frequently purchased book in that niche. And there's probably 20 or 30 books that are about physician finances. Just because it's one of the few that's written by docs. And it's got the information that you really want and need.
Right.
And so you can get that at Amazon. It's available also at Barnes & Noble. You can buy it for your iPad. It's available for your Kindle.
Yeah.
But highly recommended. I've got a few chapters in there for pre-meds and medical students as well.
Yep.
Although, half the book isn't going to apply to you. That's okay. It will eventually. And it's good to get the knowledge earlier rather than later.
Exactly. I think it's good to know what you need to be thinking about in the future because I was reading this stuff in college and medical school and it's like, well, I have no income, I have no money, but I need to know what I need to be thinking about in the future so that I don't, have regrets or realize that I've missed the boat on something. That's always been my fear, that I'm going to miss the boat and 10 years later realize I should have been investing in this 10 years ago. So I think it's really good to start thinking about this stuff early and to know what you need to know.
Yeah. And part of the difficult thing is realizing what the big things are.
Yes.
It's like that display they give you at some point in your life where they take the big rocks, gravel and the sand and the water, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you put the water in first or the sand in first into the jar, you're not going to have room for the big rocks.
Right.
You can figure out what the big rocks are, take care of those at least, then you'll be fine.
Yeah.
The rest of it on a physician income, you can figure out later. Mm-hmm. But get the big things right at the beginning is pretty important.
Okay. So kind of what you said so far is that as a pre-med, pick an inexpensive undergrad, pick an inexpensive medical school, and kind of live frugally. Are those the big rocks? What other things should we be thinking about?
I think those are the big rocks. I mean, the truth of the matter is for a physician, the big financial deal is your first year out of residency.
Yeah.
And so what you're doing as an undergraduate and as a medical student and even as a resident is all in preparation for that year. Because for a doctor, When you come out of residency, you go from living on $50,000 a year to all of a sudden making 200 or 250 or 300,000 or more for some specialties. And doctors can't handle that jump. And that's where they get into trouble. And if you can just keep living on $50,000 for a couple of years, all your loans will be paid off. All your, your retirement accounts will be, you'll catch up to your college roommates. You'll have a down payment for your dream house. But the problem is people come out of residency, and even before they've come out, they've already committed to buy this super expensive home. They've got 2 car payments. Their credit cards are maxed out. And it takes them a decade before they even start, seriously saving and investing. Whereas if they can just manage that jump a little bit better, they would be set for life, basically. Because the thing is, when you first come out of residency, you're used to living on $50,000 a year. And the thing is, it's no hard thing to do it for another year. But you just got to grow your income as slowly as you can. In fact, I know one resident that's kind of a super saver. She's saving far more than I ever did as a resident, but she put $23,000 away as a resident.
Wow.
Retirement. And, obviously most people aren't going to be able to do that because it's almost half your income as a resident. But basically, she took what I said about living as a resident when you're an attending, applied it to the stage before. She kept living like a medical student as a resident. And it works there too. It's not quite as dramatic of a change, but it does work. And the truth is getting that money working for you early allows compound interest to work.
That's fantastic. And then, do you have any kind of tips for residents in terms of investing, or what should we be doing with our little tiny income now that we actually have something?
Well, one thing I think is to pick up a little bit of perspective, right? I mean, it seems like a tiny income, making $50,000 a year, but keep in mind that's the average household income.
You're right.
And so I think getting a little perspective and realizing, I'm living on $50,000 and it feels a little bit tight, but I assure you, there's a family down the street living on $45,000. And so even as a resident, I think it's possible to save. I would get in the habit of saving a significant chunk of your income, even as a resident. In general, that money should go into what's called a Roth type of investing account, which means you pay taxes up front and then it's never taxed again. Whether that's in your Roth 401k at work or your Roth 403b at work, or whether that's a Roth IRA, doesn't matter so much to me. Although if your employer is offering what's called a match, meaning if you put some money in, they put some money in, I would be sure to get that. But the point is, you're never going to be in a tax bracket this low ever again.
So
not
take advantage.
And not during retirement. So as a resident, it's all about the Roth account. So get as much into a Roth as you can. Even if you're using your 401k at work and they don't offer a Roth option, your last year of residency, right when you come out, you can convert that to a Roth.
It
costs you a little bit of tax money. But again, even that year where you're half a resident and half an attending, you're going to be in a tax bracket that you probably won't see again, at least not for a very long time. And so try to have all your investments inside a Roth account by the time you get out of residency. But the main thing, I think, is probably protecting against financial ruin. What I mean by that is mostly insurance. Okay? If you're married, somebody's dependent on your income, or you have kids, you got to have life insurance. Don't get suckered into buying whole life. Go buy a big long-term life policy. Something like a 30-year level term life insurance policy. You can buy $1 million as a resident for $400 or $500 a year. And if you die, your family gets $1 million. It's just, there's no reason not to. It's so inexpensive. Just go get it. The other thing that costs a little bit more money, but is just as important, is disability insurance. Sometimes when we're young, we feel invincible. But once you start working in a hospital full time, you don't feel nearly as invincible. You start seeing these people that are young and healthy, and bad things happen to them. They get diagnosed with cancer, or they get diagnosed with a neurologic disease, or they get into trauma or whatever. And being able to keep some kind of income going the rest of your life if you're permanently disabled is pretty important. And so I recommend, at a minimum as an intern, that you get out there, whether anybody's dependent on you or not, that you go buy some disability insurance. Buy it from a good independent insurance agent, someone who can sell you a policy from any company. And that way they can put 2 or 3 policies up, show you the differences between them, and make some recommendations. This is something that you really only have to purchase once or twice in your life. So you might as well learn a little bit about it and buy a nice policy that you can carry with you throughout the rest of your career. Now, they don't let you buy that much as a resident. The
Right.
biggest benefit you're probably going to be able to buy is probably about $5,000 per month. But even having an income of $60,000 a year tax-free for the rest of your life
Yeah.
is very different from living on Social Security.
Yeah. Definitely. That's great advice. And I got mine last year because I'm at Mayo Clinic and they offer disability insurance to their residents, but I wanted an ophthalmology specific policy because it's otherwise there's all these technicalities you have to look into and things I had to learn and to get kind of a gender neutral policy and all these riders. And man, there's a lot. You have to really.
Disability insurance is complicated. And the reason why is because disability is 50 shades of gray, right? I mean, you've got all these different gradations of what's disability and what isn't, and
Yep.
what about psych stuff, what about, neurologic stuff, and it just gets very complicated. Whereas life and death is pretty black and white. I mean, I'm an emergency doc,
Yeah.
and I see all the gray between life and death, and it only lasts about 15 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's pretty clear what's going on, whether someone's alive or dead.
Right.
But disability is not like that, and that's why you have to go get a doctor's signature every year saying you're still disabled, and why these policies are so complicated is just because there's so much gray in there.
Yep.
And it's really, for the most part, the more you spend on a disability insurance policy, the more stuff it's going to cover.
Yeah.
But I think the main thing as a resident is just get something. If your employer offers something, get that. Get a little better policy when you become an attending.
Mm-hmm.
If your employer doesn't offer anything, we'll buy an independent, an individual policy. I own both a group policy and an individual policy for various reasons I write about on my blog. But you're right, the stuff is a little bit complicated.
Yeah.
But the point is, get something.
Okay.
You need disability insurance. Anything's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Other things that residents have a big concern about is managing their student loans.
Yes.
Just gotten more complicated. It gets more complicated every year, it seems like. A couple of years ago, basically, you didn't have any choice but to wait until you finished residency, and then you had a big decision to make. You either stayed in the federal programs or you refinanced your loans. The federal programs people would stay in sometimes because they were hoping to get loan forgiveness if they were working for a nonprofit, a 501c3. For the most part, these were academic positions. But there were a few community positions that were also with the 501c3. But now it's gotten a lot more complicated. Initially, it was because of a good thing, because some of these refinancing companies decided, hey, maybe we'll get to these doctors a little bit earlier and we'll refinance loans as a resident.
Yeah.
So that's exciting because all of a sudden you can take these 6%, 7%, 8% loans and refinance them to 3 or 4% as a resident.
Right.
So not only did they allow you to do that, but also like the federal programs, these two companies that did this allowed you to have these really low payments during residency of either $0 or $100 a month, which is wonderful because it's the best of both worlds. And so then people started going crazy refinancing their student loans as residents. The only downside is once you did that, you couldn't stay in the federal forgiveness programs. But if you knew you weren't going to work for a 501c3, it was a great move. Well, in fact, I think it's in 3 days it goes live. There's a new federal program called Repay. And what makes things complicated with it is it basically subsidizes your interest during residency.
Okay.
So your interest rate is really about half of what it was, which is more or less in the same neighborhood as the student loan refinancing companies will get your loan into.
Yeah.
And so there's a few other downsides of going into this Repay program, but it's just a much, much more complicated decision now than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost worth paying someone a few $100 for advice as an intern to decide what to do with your student loans now. It's just gotten to be such a complicated decision.
Right.
Because the right move, if you're still going, if you're going to work for a 501c3, and who really knows that at the beginning of the residency,
Right.
but if you're going to work for a 501c3, you definitely want to stay in the federal programs. But if you're not, now you have a hard decision, and you've got to weigh the rates that the refinancing companies are offering you
Right.
with basically half of the rate you're getting from the federal government. And that's assuming you don't want to stay in one of the programs you're already in, such as the IBR or the PAY program.
Right.
It's just gotten a lot more complicated. But the truth is, when you're talking about several $100,000 in loans, it's worth becoming an expert.
Yeah.
If I owed that kind of money, I'd know everything about those programs, you know. And so I think you got to spend a little bit of time on that as a resident too. But those are the main things: the insurance, getting started a little bit on investing, practicing living within your income, getting ready for that year when you're going to graduate and be an attending, and managing your student loans properly. I think those are the main issues for residents to hit on.
Okay, so maybe talking to an advisor about managing your student loans, because one of my co-residents is kind of the mindset, like, I'm just going to pay off my loans as fast as possible and just put all my money towards my loans and not do anything else until my loans are gone. But if you're going to work in academics, if you're going to work, like you said, for a 501c3, which most big hospitals are, then maybe that's not the best decision.
Well, I think it really comes down to specialty and what area of the country. For example, if you want to be an emergency doc and you want to live in Salt Lake like I do, the only 501c3 you can work for is the local academic medical center. Now, there are other 501c3 hospitals here, but none of them employ emergency docs directly. They contract.
Oh, interesting.
So even though a lot of hospitals are 501c3s, doesn't mean your job will be.
Oh, wow.
So it can get a little bit complicated. A lot of people email me asking, what are the chances of me working for a 501c3 as a radiologist? And it's hard to say because it just varies across the country.
Right.
Plus, you've also got the risk that the federal program doesn't work out for whatever reason.
Right.
I mean, when doctors start getting $300,000 and $400,000 worth of student loans being forgiven, it's going to show up on the pages of the New York Times.
Right.
It's going to be a headline: doctors getting hundreds of thousands forgiven. And there's some risk that program will be modified.
Yeah. That
it will go away completely. Now, I like to hope that those who are already in it will be grandfathered in.
Right. That's what we're all hoping.
There's no promise.
Yeah.
I mean, Obama's budget last year suggested limiting that forgiveness to just $57,000. Now, that's basically a non-starter for medical students.
Yeah, no.
If Congress changed it to that and didn't grandfather anybody in, it's like the program doesn't even exist for doctors.
Yeah.
Because the plan of doctors that are going for this are basically to have forgiven an amount pretty similar to what they had when they came out of medical school.
Yeah.
After 3 to 5 years of residency or fellowship, they make payments for 5 years, and then basically they're back at the level they were at when they came out of medical school. So they're hoping to get $200,000 or $300,000 or $400,000 forgiven.
Right?
And there's some risk that could go away. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. I think people who are already in the pipeline are going to get grandfathered in.
I sure hope so.
Promise. And so I don't know that's necessarily the wrong move to just throw everything you make at your loans.
Yeah.
For example, if the loans you have are 6 or 8%, that's a pretty darn good guaranteed investment.
Yeah.
But if you can refinance them to 3%, well, I'd start looking at maybe investing in a Roth IRA instead of throwing every dollar you have at your student loans.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think people need to get those loans paid off within 2 to 5 years of getting out of residency.
Okay.
When you drag these things out for 20 years, they shouldn't be like your mother-in-law that you keep in the basement for your whole life,
Yeah.
Get them out of your life.
Okay. That's good advice too. It's just hard because it kind of like you just said, there's no straightforward answer. There's no clear cut, this is what you should do. I think few residents know where they're going to end up practicing or what kind of practice they're going to end up having, unless they're dead set on being a hospitalist. Then, how do you know? And wow.
Well, you're right that it's difficult to make that decision. The closer you get to the end of your residency, the easier that'll be. I mean, by the time you're into your last year, you probably already got a contract. You know exactly who you're going to be working for.
Sure.
So at a certain point, you figure it out. But you're right; it's difficult at the beginning of residency to know what exactly to do with your student loans in particular.
Right. I'm in my second year.
The thing is, you can delay that decision a few years. It'll cost you a few thousand to delay, but sometimes having your options open is worth a few thousand.
Yep. Okay. Great advice for residents. Really great. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Any other big things that you think you wish you would have known, or what you want to tell the pre-meds and medical students and residents of America?
Well, sometimes I see people that are maybe a little bit too focused on the financial stuff as a medical student and resident. I mean, the truth is, medical school and residency is a time to be learning medicine.
Yep.
You want to become the best doctor you can. This should be really something pretty minor on the side rather than a huge focus for you.
Sure.
I mean, if medicine is just a means to an end, just a means to becoming financially independent, you're not going to like it.
No.
You didn't go to medical school for the most part because you wanted to make a ton of money.
Right.
You went because you wanted to help people, because you loved science, et cetera, et cetera. And so in your training, focus on learning medicine. Mm-hmm. That's probably the best thing you can do for your financial future, is find a career that you're going to be happy doing every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, it's far easier to become financially successful if you're willing to do a job until you're 60 or 65 or 70. If you can just find a job that you love that much, I think you're set. Whereas if you turns out you hate it and you're doing everything you can to get out by 45 or 50, that's you really got to save a lot of money, and you got to make some smart financial decisions to be able to pull that off. It's far easier if you can extend your career a little bit. The other benefit of doing that is you got more time for your money to compound. You got less time in retirement that money's got to last. It just works out a lot better mathematically if you can work longer. So I would focus on, rather than figuring out how to get out of work as soon as you can, is finding a job that doesn't feel like work to you.
Yeah. Great advice. So great. Well, thank you so much for talking with us. This is just amazing information that everybody wants to know. I think this is going to help so many people. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And I learned a ton.
I wish somebody had handed this information to me when I was an undergraduate.
Yeah, for sure. It's something everyone needs to know. And I'll be sure to link to your blog and link to your book. And it's a fantastic resource. You're doing amazing things. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.